Hi there, it's Derek again at 3x Point. We will continue learning about functions in this session. And while I bring up my slide, in the last video we were talking about scalar functions, and in this video I'd like us to focus more on the aggregate functions. And the definition here says it returns single value based on the calculated values in a column. Now, this definition really might not make a lot of sense to you unless we do some demonstration on it. So I'm going to copy this common aggregate functions into our SQL Server Management Studio, and I will comment them out like we did in the previous video. Remember how to do this? Okay, so now we will take them one after the other. Now, generally speaking, this would work with data that's already in a table, right? So I have a table that's been preloaded with some data in our sample database. And by now, I would expect you know how to create your database, your tables, and to insert data into them. So I've done that. We have some data in this table, and we will start to do some analysis using some of the inbuilt aggregate functions. So let's say, for example, we want to start with the sum. And what sum does is what it sounds like, which is to sum the values that we pass into it. This time around, I'm not going to pass in some random values like this. What I'll rather do is pass in the column that exists on the table. And to sum, for example, I wouldn't pass in product because product does not, as you can see here, contain integers or numbers. Okay, so if I did this, you can see that it says operand data type end varchar is invalid for some operator. So it wouldn't allow us to do that. So I'll bring back the data so that we can see what's on that table. Okay, so on the other hand, what I will pass into it is, let's say for example, I want to sum up how many units were sold, right? Which is the unit sold. If I select this from the table, you can see that it returns just one value back to us. Let's bring back the whole data again. So select everything. So if we sum 3 and 4, 2, 7, if you do all this calculation, you will find out that what we have is 91, and that's just what it's done. It's just sum up everything back for us. And remember from the definition about functions, we say that functions return just a single value. That's what they do. So be it inbuilt function, user defined function, scalar functions, or aggregate functions, what they do is they return just one value back to us. Okay, so now I know what might be going through your mind might be what if what I want to do is return more than just one value. Okay, in the next video we'll start talking about group by, and that's where you will now start to see everything come to play. So generally speaking, like I said, sum returns just one value as a function, and all you need to do is pass in just the column name into it. Now let's move on to the next function here, which is the max. And what max does is it'll look through the table and bring back the maximum figure, and we can see that maximum here is 36 for units sold. So if I did this, you would see that what it's bring back to us is 36. If I return all the data on the table, you can see that on this table we have 36, and max has brought back 36 for us. And the other side of the coin is the min, which does the direct opposite, which is to bring back the least value from this table. And I can see here that the value is 2, so that's what I would expect to return. And you see it returns 2 for us. Now This makes a lot of sense by the time you start having to analyze data on a table that has millions of rows. No one would expect you to go into the table and start scrolling all the way down. But with all these functions, they come in very handy that you could just pass the function into your query and then it returns back to you the data that you expect. Now we will go back into one of the aggregate functions that is commonly used, which is the count. You get to use this a lot. And what count does is it doesn't sum, because this is one mistake that some people do, and it just brings about a lot of confusion. And to explain the difference between sum and count, is just to say that count does what the name says it does, which is to count. So if I were to count how many rows we have on this table, what I would do is to go into each of the rows and start going one after the other and say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So if I did count and passed in units sold, for example, let's see what it brings back. You can see it brings back 12. Now that doesn't mean that units sold is the only thing it works with. It basically just counts everything on the table for us. So it doesn't matter in this case what column you pass into it. Any of the columns on the table you pass into it, it will bring back data. I mean, even if you pass in star into it, it will still bring back 12, because what it's generally doing is just to count the number of rows we have on that table. Okay, so that's just what count does. And if we go into average, AVG means average. All right, so let's say the average of units sold, right? Units sold. Now average brings back the average from the table. Okay, so if I did this, it brings back 7. Now think about this. How do you calculate the average of something? Average is generally calculated when you add all this together and you divide it by the number of rows which is in it. So if I said the sum of units sold divided by the count of this table, it should bring back the average, right? So I can as well write the query like this and say select sum units underscore sold. Okay, and remember from our video session on arithmetic operators, I could use divide, right? And then I do count of units sold. So this is where your SQL writing start becoming quite interesting, because now you will start to put in a number of things that you've learned together, and you can see that that actually returns 7. So this is to tell you that you can actually start doing some custom calculation with your SQL and then just pass in the column for you, and then it brings back what you want. And that's the essence of all these inbuilt functions, to help you minimize the number of code that you have to write like this. So if you have average, which is very handy, rather than just doing this custom calculation, you could just put the average, put the name of the column you want there, and then it will return what you want. You can see that both of them returns 7 for us. So this would not be relevant when you have things like this. Okay, now the reason why you may want to start doing certain calculations like this is because if you don't have inbuilt aggregate functions that can do this for you, then you have two options. It's either you start writing your own user defined functions, or you could just put your SQL statement and put the logic that you want to calculate into it. So that's all there is to aggregate functions. Now there's something I need to let you know, going back to our count function. So let's go back to all the data from the table. So going back to count, let's say I wanted to count units sold still. Units sold from sales, and of course it's count. And of course, you would imagine that it will bring back 12 because we have 12 rows on that table. Now, you can start asking yourself this question, that what if there was a null value on this row? Do you think this will return back to us 12 or not? All right, let's actually put some value into this row. Let's put a null value into this row. So insert into sales, and let's just put on the ID column just a value. Values, let's just put 1. Oh, sorry, let's just put 13. All right, and that will give us null on the rest of the columns. Okay, so let's do our no. So now we have 13 rows, right? And we've said count units sold from this table. What do you think will come back to us, 13 or 12? It's 12. So the reason for that is that, generally speaking, count does not consider any row that does not have a value. It would only go and search for records with value and then count them. And that's why most of the time you find people using the ID column to do the count, because to a great deal of extent, you would, given the primary key on that table, if there is, you would be rest assured that you can have a valid data returned back to you in this situation. So I just wanted to quickly point that out to you, because these are the kind of things that happen when you write your gigantic SQL query, but for some reason you're not returning back good data. And that's what's most important to the business. It's not about you writing your SQL and returning data back to the business, but how good is the data, not how good is your query. Even though your query has to perform good, you have to put some performance consideration when you're writing your SQL, but then you need to also take maximum care to ensure that the data that's been returned is the data that's required by the business, right? Okay, so having said this, I'll see you in the next video when we start making use more of all these aggregate functions with the group by clause. See you then.